Let's take a look at the example in Chapter 13 where your authors compute the value per share for Nike stock using net present value of future cash flows of the firm, or free cash flows of the firm. So our first task is to determine operating and non-operating assets and liabilities. So let me find my non-operating assets, since that's typically easier. Those two, I'm looking for keywords. So those three non-operating assets, and they total up to, of course, 0 for that one. Let me total those up right down there. I'm going to say 3337 plus 2628, and there's nothing there for that discontinued operations. 2628 and 3337. That looks good. So there are my non-operating assets. Now let me find my non-operating liabilities. Once again, look for keywords. Very carefully. Oops, missed one there. So there are 4 items for non-operating liabilities. Let me drop those in right there. Those are 57, and I want my liabilities to be negative. 121, 18, and 1210. So there are my total non-operating liabilities. Let me get rid of all of this scratching here. And now let's take a look at total assets right there. And total assets are 17,584,000,000. 17,584,000,000. And total stockholders' equities right there are going to be 11,156,000,000 total shareholders' equity. So let me drop those in right there. 11,156,000,000. And now my liabilities are just going to be the difference between assets and stockholders' equity. I want those to be negative, so let me subtract like this. Nope, let's try again. Let me subtract like this. And there are my liabilities shown negatively. And now I can sum up down here total assets minus non-operating assets to give me my operating assets. Total assets minus non-operating. So that gives me operating assets of 11,619,000,000. And now my operating liabilities are going to be total liabilities minus non-operating, and that gives me 5,022,000,000 in operating liabilities. So let me compute my net operating assets right there. Net assets are assets minus liabilities. So let me say assets minus liabilities. Add those two things up, and I get 6597 for net operating assets. And now let's take a look at the non-operating items right there. Let's combine non-operating assets and non-operating liabilities. In this case, assets exceed liabilities. So this figure, instead of being a negative indicating a net liability, is going to be positive, indicating a net non-operating asset. Normally you would expect that to be a liability, or as your authors call it, an obligation, but in this case it is a net asset. Net non-operating assets. And now let's take a look at computing NOPAT. I need to pick my operating items out of the income statement. And the rule is, unless it's clearly non-operating, then we'll include it as operating. So the only non-operating item, income or expense there, I see is interest as a non-operating item. And of course, discontinued operations are non-operating. So it looks like all of these things, except for that subtotal there for gross profit, and this other. I don't know what other is, but I can't clearly tell that that is non-operating, so I'm going to include that as operating. So right here, let me compute my income from operations by combining all of those things. Most income statements will give us an operating income subtotal, but this one doesn't. So let me say 25,313 in revenues minus 14,279 for cost of sales minus demand creation expense, which is probably advertising and other things, 2745, minus operating expenses of $5,035,000,000, minus other of 15, and I think that's it for my operating items. 3,239,000,000. And now let's go ahead and sign everything in the income statement. That is interest income, so even though it's negative in the income statement, it looks like since it's income, it is added in arriving at net income. That 15 we've already included. Income tax expense is 808, and net income from discontinued operations is 21. So let's total that up and see what happens. We have to make some adjustments to it. So all of those items total together give me 2455. So something is amiss somewhere. I'm $30 off. Let me go up here and take a look. That should be a plus 15 there. Right there. Even though it's listed as negative 15 in the on the face of the income statement, that negative is let me get rid of this. That negative is an income item. So that's added in arriving at net income. And now it looks like my total agrees there. So it's always important to total up your signed income statement numbers, as that clearly illustrates. Now let me put some headings on this. Let's say gross, tax effect, and after tax. And let me center those and underline them. And now let's take a look at the tax effect. There's only one non-operating item that we have to list a tax for. It's that $3 right there. So over here, let me say minus 0.37, our statutory rate, times that amount. And that gives me the tax effect of that interest income. And it's minus $1.11. So the tax effect on my operating items are going to be all of the taxes minus the tax effect on the one non-operating item. So that's going to give me 807 rounded. And the after-tax is going to be the sum of those things. So I sum those two things and I get 2462. And let me copy and paste and paste. Notice I didn't paste for the tax item because I've already included those 808 in taxes in those two things. So if I total this column up, that should give me my 2485 after tax. And it's always good to do those double checks. 2485, that's good. And if I total this column up, it should be a negative 808. And so everything checks out. Let me format these a little better. Make these no decimals and no symbol on those. None right there. Okay, so that looks a little better formatting wise. And very importantly, there is my NOPAT number, net operating profit after tax. And that goes in my analysis along with these two items up there, net operating assets and net non-operating, in this case assets, but usually obligations. So now let's pull all of that information together with the additional information in the chapter and determine the value per share for Nike. Now let's fill in our basic information set down there. First of all, for net operating assets, let me go pick up what I just computed. Right up there. And for net non-operating, let me go pick that number up. That number will usually be a liability and will usually be negative, but in this case, instead of net non-operating obligations, it's net non-operating assets. Net non-operating assets. Sales, I can pick those up right there in the income statement, 25,313. NOPAT, I just computed right over there. So there's my NOPAT. My net operating profit margin is going to be NOPAT divided by sales. So my net operating profit margin is not 0, but 10%. Let's put some decimals in there. Remember, on the exam, I need 5 digits of accuracy. Sales growth, we have to look that up in a minute. Net operating asset turnover, that's going to be sales divided by net operating assets. So let's put some decimals in there. There's 1 digit of accuracy, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's look the rest of that information up. I think that's going to be right here. From the textbook, terminal period sales growth is 2%. That's going to go right there. 2%. Not 0, but not 2 cents, but 2%. And what else do we have there? The net operating asset turnover. They're going to round that to 4. So I'm going to do that right there. 4. And what else do they have in this information set? Sales growth of 9% right there. So I'm going to drop that in right there. Sales growth of 9%. There's a weighted average cost of capital of 9.2%. I'm going to drop that in right there. .2%. There we go. And I still need my net operating profit margin. I don't see it there. There it is. Let me get rid of some of this other stuff. The net operating profit margin of 10%. So let me drop that in, the number that your book uses. Right there, 10%. Shares outstanding, where are they? Right there. 716 shares outstanding. And I think that's all the information that we need to do our analysis. So let's do our analysis. First of all, let's drop in sales right there from my input area. It's always a good idea to have a separate input area and analysis area. So let me go get sales right there. And now for sales growth, let's say equals 9%. And notice I have 4 digits there. Let me get a 5th digit. Those extra ones don't mean anything, but just for emphasis, I need 5 digits on the exam. And let's do a formula to get that number. And then let's copy it all the way to the terminal period. And now let's do our sales. Our estimate for sales for 2014 is 2013 sales times 1 plus the growth rate. And that gives me 27,591. So let's copy and paste that all the way out to there actually. And now let me drop in my terminal growth rate. I'm going to put that right up there. And that is going to be 2% given in the chapter. Not 0, but 2%. And let me also drop that 2% in right there. So instead of having the same amount for the terminal growth period that I had for 2017, that's now going to grow by 2% up to 36,446. Now let's take a look at my NOPAT to sales number, my net operating profit margin. That is going to be 10%. We computed 9.7267, but we'll use your author's rounding here, 10%. And let's make all of those 10%. Copy all the way out to there. And now my NOPAT. My NOPAT, my net operating profit after tax, is 10% of sales. So I'm going to say 10% times sales. Copy and paste. And there are my net operating profit after tax numbers out through the terminal growth period. Now my net operating asset turnover, I computed that to be 3.837. Your authors rounded it to 4, so let's use their number. Copy that formula and paste it all the way out to there. So my net operating assets are going to be 1/4 of sales. Sales divided by 4. And let me go ahead and drop in my net operating assets for the current year, 2013, even though I don't think that number figures in your calculations. That is 6597. Yes, it does. So let me copy and paste all of these. Sales divided by the net operating asset turnover. And now the increase in net operating assets is going to be current minus the previous year. So copy and paste that all the way out there. Let's try again. Copy and paste that all the way out to there. So out to the last year we have terminal period minus 2017 for our increase in net operating assets. Now free cash flow of the firm is going to be the cash flow generated by operations, NOPAT, minus the increase in net operating assets. So $301 million of the NOPAT for 2014 go to fund new assets, and the remaining $2,458,000,000 is free cash flow of the firm. Copy and paste. And there's my free cash flow of the firm for each of those years. So let's discount this one back to today. Using the weighted average cost of capital, I've already dropped it in here. Let me put a decimal in there to make sure I have 9.2%. Yes. So let me bring that back to today. So I bring that back one period by dividing by 1 plus the interest rate. So right there, let me say equals 2458 divided by 1 plus 9.2%, 1.092. And that gives me 2251. Let me do the same for the next year. Bring that back 2 periods right there. 2378 divided by 1 plus 9.2% raised to the second power, and that gives me 2 billion, 1 million. Let's do the same for the next year. Let's take that 2601 and divide by 1 plus the interest rate raised to the third power. And that 2601 comes back 3 years as 1998. And right here, let's go get that. (2017) cash flow, free cash flow, divide by 1 plus that interest rate raised to the fourth power, and that gives me 1994. And it looks like this number has already been dropped in there. Let's see what the formula is. Well, let's go ahead and write it. So I want to take that beginning terminal cash flow, and I want to take all of those future cash flows and bring them back one period. And the way I do that is divide by the discount rate minus the growth rate. In this case, the discount rate is weighted average cost of capital. So let me do that. Actually, it's already done, but I'm going to do it again. So there is the beginning terminal cash flows divided by 9.2% minus that 2% right there. Right parenthesis. And there's the same 48,133. Now that 48,133 has got to come back 1, 2, 3, 4 periods. So let's do that right there. Let's say equals 48,133 divided by 1 plus the interest rate. And I want to do that 4 times, so raised to the fourth power. And that gives me 33,853. Now let's add all of those things up. And those things being the present value of all future cash flows. And I get 42,098,000,000. And normally at this point down here you would subtract current non-operating net obligations, but in this case those things are net, not obligations, but assets. So let me go get those. And they are right there. And the value of the firm consists of the net non-operating assets that they currently have and the present value of all future cash flows. The value of the firm is 46,657. The number of shares outstanding, let me go get those right there, 716. And now that didn't work very well. Let me try again. 716. Now let's divide value by number of shares to get the value per share of 6516. And there they have that. get rid of some of this other stuff here. There they have that value per share of 65.16 right there. So that's the example in the book. Let me go up and get the computation from the book and bring it down here. Let's see, how can I do this? Like that. So there's that 65.16 that we got, and all of the numbers are pretty much the same. There's the 1994 that we got right there. There's the 34.66 that we got right there. Notice your authors show this as a negative, even though they add it, when arriving at the value of the firm. And that's the example from chapter 13.